I was born in New York, January 17, 1914. I did spend my early time in New York and got into the business in New York at the age of 19. I was an usher at an art house that played foreign movies called the Little Carnegie Playhouse, right next to Carnegie Hall. And while I was ushering, or whenever I felt the mood, I would send a penny postcard with some line I thought was funny to one of the big columnists at that time, Walter Winchell or Ed Sullivan. And once in a while, to my delight, my name would appear in the column, getting credit for what Winchell or Sullivan thought was a funny, topical one-liner. And one day, a reviewer from the Variety, a weekly newspaper, came to the theater to review a new German movie that was being run for the first time. We knew each other, and in the course of saying hello, etc., he said, "I heard a couple of your one-liners last night at Lowe's State Theater." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "There's a comedian down there doing a show this week called Bob Hope." And I recognized a couple of the lines I'd read of yours in Winchell, and Bob Hope used them in his monologue. I said, "Oh, that's really nice. So why don't you take an ad in Variety and maybe somebody will buy some of your stuff?" I said, "That's a great idea. How much is an ad?" He said, $15 an inch. I said, I make $18 a week, and I got a family of 5. We're trying to survive on that. This was 1933, when there was no food in a lot of homes, including ours. At any rate, he was very nice. He said, "I'll tell you what, write an ad and send it down to me at the Variety. I'll print it, and one day when you got $15, you can pay the paper." I said, "Oh, that's very nice." So that day, I thought, and I don't know why it happened, but it's kind of a miracle, I guess. I had become aware by reading that a new comedian was getting kind of a fame around Broadway, at least. His name was Milton Berle, and all the other comedians were blaming him for stealing their material. And there was kind of a feud going on, and it would appear in the columns, etc. And I don't know how it grabbed me, but I wrote an ad and measured out 1 inch on a piece of paper, and I printed it, and it said, "Positively Burl-proof gags, so bad not even Milton would steal them. The house that joke built." And then I put down the telephone number of the theater where I was working. And I put the ad in an envelope, and that night, after I got off work, I walked down to 45th Street and left it in the mail slot. Naturally, I was kind of excited, and when next Wednesday came around, I was working in the office of the theater running the addressograph machine, which mailed out programs of the following week's show. And the mailman came and brought the weekly Variety, and I riffled through it, and there it was, my advertisement. And I got a big kick out of that. And then the phone rang, and I picked it up, and I said, "Little Carnegie Playhouse?" and a voice that I thought was a friend of mine, who was always calling me up and using assumed names and jerking around. He said, "Mr. Brecher?" I said, "Lee, I'm busy now, I'm working. Call me later." And I hung up. The phone rang a moment later. I said, "Little Carnegie Playhouse?" And a voice said, "No son of a bitch hangs up on Milton Berle." And then I started to shake. I realized that this might be Milton Berle, and he must be mad at me for what I did in the paper. And I kind of stammered out, "Yes, Mr. Berle. Who is this guy, Brecher, in the ad?" I said, "Brecher, that's me." He said, "If you're so goddamn clever, I'm being held over at the Capitol Theater for a third week starting tomorrow morning. Be at the stage door of the theater tonight at 11 and bring some funny stuff. It better be funny." And that was it. He hung up. I went into shock. And then when it recovered, I realized I better have something to show him if I dared to go. This might be my big chance. Who knew? And I got the daily papers, and I found some things that were of topical news, and I wrote some one-liners, and I typed them out during the day. At 11 o'clock, I ran down the 7th Avenue to the theater, to the back door. I'd never been in the back of a theater. I never met an actor, and I was in a mild state of shock. But I was sent upstairs and told to knock on the star dressing room, which I did. And a moment later, the door was opened by a naked young man. That was hardly exciting at this point. If it had been a naked young woman, my life would have perhaps been different. But it happens that the naked young man said, "Are you Brecher?" I said, "Brecher." He said, "You got any stuff?" "Yes, sir." I handed him a couple of sheets of paper, and he closed the door. And I stood there waiting for the governor to call. If he opened that door and said, "It's good, it's funny," maybe I could stop being an usher. In 5 minutes, he opened the door. He said, "Some of it's pretty good. Go up to the Park Central Hotel. You know where it is?" I said, "Yes, sir, it's up the street." He said, "Go second floor, my agent, Charles Morrison. He'll give you a check." I ran all the way. But before I left, he did say, "And then come back here. We're going to work all night." That was news to me. But I ran all the way to the hotel, and sure enough, a nice man opened the door, handed me an envelope, and said, "Good luck, kid." I ran out in the street, and I opened the envelope, and I opened the check, and I was holding more money than I ever held in my life, $50. And that's how I got into show business. I ran back to the theater and ran up to the dressing room, and Berle by then was dressed, and he said, "We're going to the Edison Hotel. I have an office there. We got to work all night. I got to get a new monologue to go with my acts." I said, Who's going to be your acts?" He said, "Bing Crosby and Kate Smith are on the bill." Berle apparently was the star of the bill. He was the headliner. That was 1933. So here I was, without knowing it, with the big time. We went to the Edison Hotel. He ordered some food, and then I sat down at a typewriter, and he made me keep on ad-libbing one-liners from the newspapers, and finally he would say, after 5 or 6 tries, "That's good, put it down. That's no good. Yeah, that's funny, put it down." And gradually we got about 8 or 10 lines, based pretty much on what was going on in the world. And having typed them out, he said, "I gotta learn this stuff." I said, "Do you mind if I lie down?" I was exhausted. He said, "Be my guest." And I went to sleep. When I woke up, he was just leaving, and he said, "My show starts at 11. Why don't you come up and listen and see what happens?" He said, "I'll leave word at the front door, at the box office, at the front door, they'll let you in," which saved me 50 cents. That's what the price was that time. I did go to the theater, very nervous, expecting to hear some of what I had made up. And I sat down among the early crowd, mainly, I guess, salesmen, out early before they make their rounds. And the show started. Out came this brash, remarkable young man, full of fire, full of energy, dancing out, attacking the audience with some funny lines that I suppose he always used. Then he launched into the new monologue. And once in a while, he would get to one of my lines. And I was in heaven when I heard the audience laugh. And they laughed pretty loud. And when that was over, he went into his regular show, introducing Crosby, Kate Smith, one thing, another. And finally, about that hour that went by, seemed like an eternity. It was over. The movie went on, and I went out and went up backstage. I was walking on a cloud. They laughed at my stuff. That meant I was going to be a writer of comedy, and who knows how far I would go. As I reached the landing of his dressing room, I heard a screaming voice of a man saying, "Listen, you son of a bitch, if you don't take those lines out, you'll never work on the low circuit again, and that's an order, and don't you forget it." Then I hear Burl saying, "Please, LK, please, this stuff is funny. Let me use some of it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not dirty. You heard me. Don't use a word of it." Out came a huge man with a red face, very angry, stormed out, looked back and said, "You heard me. Not a word of it." And he was gone. I walked in. Burl was very upset. I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "That was the manager. He cut out some of the stuff you wrote. He doesn't like it. It's so off color." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I got to drop it out." And he said some words I don't want to repeat about the manager. I said, "So what do you want to do?" He said, "Well, I'll have to drop it out, son of a bitch." A couple of the lines may not mean too much today, but they had a meaning then, which is what caused the uproar. For example, this was 1933. There was a new star in the Hollywood heavens called Marlene Dietrich, and she had set a new style of wearing pants. And at the same time, Franklin Roosevelt was a new president. He'd just been in office a couple of months, and he had closed the banks for serious reasons affecting the whole country. and nobody could get any money out of the bank. They were using script. So people who couldn't get money were in real trouble. They couldn't buy groceries. It was a terrible time. And one of the lines that Burl had used, that was now out, was, when the banks closed, Marlene Dietrich was caught with her pants down. Then there were some others that were kind of blue that had gotten laughs. They were out. So I had to stay there and try to make up some more lines. But that was the beginning of what I think may have turned out to be a career. I was 19. That was only 75 years ago. I'm still looking for work. I couldn't make a living with Burl because the $50 didn't happen every week. When he would move to another theater, instead of me writing new stuff, he used the stuff he used in the previous theater. So there were many times that I never heard from him. And then there were some weeks he'd call up and say, I need a few gags. And I would write him and he might give me $15 or $20. He was not a big spender. At any rate, while that happened, he did recommend to some of the lower type vaudevillians that hung around Broadway, and particularly around a restaurant called Lindy's. He did recommend me, which was better than paying me, he thought. And they would occasionally give me a $5 or $10 order for one or two jokes. And I lived hand to mouth for a long time. During the next few years, I managed to get more orders where maybe I'd get $50 or $100 from various vaudevillians or people who were doing a radio stint. And then finally, I had a real fight with Burl about his unwillingness to pay, and we stopped speaking. And I then got a job through a friend as editor of a new magazine called the Mickey Mouse magazine. It was being published by a man who worked for United Artists as publicity director. And he had the rights from Walt Disney, who then was only known for one thing, one real short called Mickey Mouse, which would appear in big theaters every once in a while and was getting quite popular. So they were merchandising Mickey Mouse, which was the beginning of that kind of merchandising. And among them, the deals was to put out a magazine. And it was really a big magazine, nothing like the one that's out today. Instead of having comic strips, it had stories, supposedly for kids. But actually, the stories that I wrote, and a co-editor named Alan Lipscott, who worked with me, wrote also, were amusing, but they weren't for kids. We enjoyed writing kind of parodies of movies and used names like Clark Bagel and other titles of feature pictures, and they were printed. Nobody bought the magazine. The publisher thought they were funny, but he was kind of a jerk. It was more his own amusement that he looked for. He didn't realize that they weren't for an audience of kids, so the thing folded. But then one day, I got a phone call. This is 1937. I'd been in the business 4 years. Got a phone call, and it was Milton Berle. He said, "Still mad at me?" I said, "I'm too busy for that, Milton. What is it?" He said, I had a deal to do an audition for a radio show for the Yankee Network starting next Sunday. This is a Monday, I think. And the writer that I had signed to do the script, David Friedman, he dropped dead yesterday. Did you hear about it? I said, yes. David Friedman was the most important comedy radio writer in the business. He had been in a lawsuit against a former employer, Eddie Cantor, for breach of contract, and he dropped dead after a court appearance. So I said to Burl, I'm sorry about that. He was very good. He said, yeah. He said, I'd like you to write the script for me. I said, really? He said, yeah. It's 45 minutes. There's some other people doing some music. I need about 26 minutes of comedy. Will you do it? I said, how much? The last time he had paid me, I think he had paid me about $25 for a lot of stuff. I said, $250. He said, you got it. I should have said more. Anyway, the next thing I knew, I was thinking about some kind of a script. I was being told by a producer from the ad agency that we're going to Boston on a Friday, etc. And I worked that week, and for the first time in my life, flew to Boston. I did the script. He went on Sunday. They liked it very much. The sponsor was Gillette Razor, and they signed him for 12 more weeks on that little network, 13 stations. I wrote those shows back in New York, and he would fly to Boston and do them. And then from that, they signed him for a year, 52 weeks on CBS National on Sunday night. And he signed me, and I went to work the following October. This was in the summer, and wrote a 45-minute program by myself. And midway, in the middle of the series, he got a deal to go to Hollywood to do a movie. And he was moving his radio crew, so the show would come from there while he was shooting the movie. And for the first time in my life, I left New York thrilled on a train, the 20th Century, and the Santa Fe Super Chief for 3 days, and got to Hollywood. They put me in a hotel where I started to write the next week's radio show. And before I knew it, producer of the movie called me in and said, we're not happy with the script. We want more comedy, and I want you to do it. I said, I'm doing the radio show. He said, force yourself. And he offered me $750 a week, which was, I was making $650 on the radio, which I never knew there was that much money in 1937. So here I was getting $1,400 a week and writing a radio show and working on the script. And while I was working on this script, my agent came in and said, there's a big man at Warner Brothers named Mervyn LeRoy, great director, producer. He likes the radio show he's been listening to. He wants to meet the writer. So he took me out there, and we were ushered in to this huge office, and at the far end is a small man at a desk on the phone. Behind him is a big picture that I recognized from the newspapers as Irving Berlin, who had been the big man in the movies, the head of MGM, who had died recently, married to Norma Shearer, the giant of the movies. It just occurred to me, I made a little boo-boo when I walked in to Mervyn LeRoy's office and saw that big picture on the wall. I used the name Irving Berlin, but actually I should have said Irving Thalberg. And I was led by the agent toward the desk, and LeRoy said, "Darling, I'll call you later." He hung up. He said, "That was my wife. We just had a baby." I said, "Congratulations." He said, "And this is who?" And my agent said, "Irv Brecher. You wanted to meet him. He's been writing The Burl Show and doing a picture at RKO." He said, "I like the stuff you do." And then he suddenly looked at me and then turned and looked at the picture. He said, "My God, you look just like my dear friend who just died, Irving, 2 Irvings." And then he knocked me out. He looked at the picture and looked back to me and said to the agent, "How much do you want?" And that's how I got a deal at Warner Brothers. I walked out. The agent sent me out. He stayed in and came out. He said, "He wants you for 6 months, $650 a week. What do you say?" I said, "When does it start? I'm doing the radio." He said, "Next November." I said, "Okay." And that's how I started, under personal contract with LeRoy. I went back to New York, finished the radio, closed up my apartment, came back to Hollywood in November under contract to Mervyn LeRoy. I was there for a couple of months doing a little dialogue for a movie he was shooting with Carol Lombard. And then one day he said, "This is confidential. It's not going to break in the papers for a few days, but I'm moving to MGM and I'm taking you with me because you're under contract." I was kind of excited. MGM was the #1 studio, and I was going to MGM. He said, "And I'm taking Lana Turner with me." She was under contract. He had discovered her and had used her in one picture, and she had walked in a tight sweater in profile, revealing those beautiful pontoons that were in front of her with no bra. And she came to MGM with me. And if I had had knockers like Lana, I would have become a big star too. Instead of that, I was just a writer at MGM for 10 years. January 1938, I reported to MGM, and LeRoy was given a finished script called The Wizard of Oz, and he was supposed to supervise production. He had not been involved in developing the script, but L.B. Mayer, who had signed him and taken him away from his arch enemy, Jack Warner, L.B. Mayer had decided to let LeRoy be the actual producer of The Wizard of Oz. So LeRoy did the casting, and while they were preparing, he called me in and said, "The script is practically finished, ready to go. It needs more comedy. So I want you to inject comedy in the comedy scenes for the lion, the straw man, and the thin man," which I did. I worked about a week or so and rewrote those scenes, adding laughs. And as he told me then, I would get no screen credit because I was not writing enough footage. But it didn't matter, I was getting paid, that was the main thing. So my first chore at MGM was The Wizard of Oz. And in it was a wonderful little girl named Judy Garland, who I would come to be involved with a few years later. That was 1938. Then I did, because there was no movie assignment, I did some work on MGM's radio show called MGM Good News. And I created a character for one of their contract players, Frank Morgan. He was a dirty old man on this radio show, and he would do a routine every week, and I would write it. There would be a guest star who would work with Morgan, and also the orchestra leader would be involved. His name was a great musician who wrote The Music Man, Meredith Willson. Meredith Willson. He would also do straight man in the comedy. And after a while, I got my first real assignment. I got a call from Leroy one day. He said, "Come on in." And I came to his office. He said, "You're going to write your first real movie." I said, "Yeah, what is it?" He said, "A Marx Brothers movie." I was knocked out because as a kid, back in high school, back in Yonkers where I grew up, I used to put on burnt cork and black eyebrows and wireless glasses, wire-rimmed glasses, and parted my hair, which was curly, and I looked just like Groucho, and I did Groucho Marx routines because from the day I saw their first movie called Coconuts in a little movie house in Yonkers, I was hooked, absolutely a nut for Groucho Marx as well as the Marx Brothers. After I recovered from the shock, I guess mixed with a thrill, but mainly shock, I said, "What's the movie about?" He said, "We want a thing about the circus. We're going to call it At the Circus." And Groucho is the guy who does most of the decisions for the Marx Brothers. The other two don't seem to be interested in the words, the script, so Groucho takes over. "So you're meeting him for lunch tomorrow." Oh boy, what a night that was thinking about it. I'm going to meet the giant that I've been dreaming about, idolizing as a comedian. And the next day, I came to Leroy's office, and there he was, in real life. No black mustache, just a cigar and real eyeglasses. And I said, "Hello, Mr. Marx." And he turned to Leroy and said, "Hello, Mr. Marx? You told me this guy was funny. What's funny about hello, Mr. Marx?" I said, "Mr. Marx, the only reason I used hello was I was quoting you. I heard you use it in one of your pictures, and I figured if you could use it, I could use it." He said, "You're getting funnier. Come on to lunch." And that began a beautiful experience. I wrote 2 Marx Brothers films, At the Circus and then Go West. And I worked on this first one and struggled to make it funny, and to my delight and relief, instead of there being a bunch of writers assigned to the movies, which have been the history of their past movies, I was the only writer on either of the pictures because Groucho liked what I was doing. And so I not only got 2 solo credits on 2 films, but I became the friend, lifelong friend from then on, of Groucho Marx, as well as Harpo, and in a sense, Chico. And I relish those friendships, particularly Groucho. I traveled with him on 2 hilarious trips, which are part of a book being written about me. A friend of mine, a journalist named Hank Rosenfeld, is doing a book and gives me a flattering title about me called The Wicked Wit of the West. So if anybody who's playing this has any money left, buy the book. My first movie, it's something of a favorite. I had developed and luckily became the owner of a hit radio series starting in 1944 called The Life of Riley. And after it had run a few years, it was in the top 20. Universal Pictures offered me a deal to make a feature picture, which I wrote, produced, and directed. I had never directed anything before or produced, but I did it, and it turned out to be very successful, and I loved doing it. So that's an all-time favorite for that reason. In 1944, when I finished the script of Meet Me in St. Louis, which had taken several months, and the last month I was working with a director named Vincent Minnelli to do the movie. And we were getting close to a start date, and we knew that we had Judy Garland as a star. And the script was developed with her in mind, of course. And one day, we got a call from the producer, and Minnelli went down to see him. He came back in shock. He said, Arthur Freed just told me that Judy Garland had told L.B. Mayer, the boss, that she doesn't want to play the movie. She doesn't want it because Tootie, the other character, is going to steal the picture. And we got the whole damn thing planned for Garland. And Minnelli went crazy, started cursing and swearing. He said, what are we going to do? I said, I don't know what the hell to do. Then I got a call from Freed. And I went down there. He told me the same thing. He said, that bitch, after all we've done for her, he said, listen, go up and see the boss, L.B. I told him what was happening. I told him that you were a friend of Garland, which I was in a sense. She'd been in my home a few times as a guest at dinner parties and sang songs. She was great. We loved her. I said, I'll go up. I don't know what for. I went up to see Mr. Mayer. He knew me. He was very nice. He said, son, we've got a real trouble here. And he started to say some pretty nasty things about his star. He said, I understand you know her. I want you to get her in here, or I'll get her in here. I want you to read the script to her and convince her she's got to play this thing. We can't afford to stop now and look for somebody else. She's it. No matter what happens, if you have to break her arms. I said, well, I'll do what I can. I don't know if she'll listen to me. He said, I know why she doesn't want to do it, because that so-and-so, Joe Mankiewicz, who was a producer on the lot, has told her not to play it. He's having an affair with her, and she's listening to him instead of me. Anyway, he made an appointment for her to come in, and the next day I came in, and she was there, and she was looking very unhappy. She was a little girl, you know. She was not Spencer Tracy. And she was nervous, and he said, like a grandfather, now, sweetheart, darling, go inside with the young man, and he'll show you, explain to you why it's your movie. It's not the movie of Tootie or whatever the hell her name is. I don't even know her name. That's how unimportant she is. He was a lying bastard. We went in the other room. He closed the door. She sat down. She said, Irv, I really don't want to do it. Don't ask me why. I said, I know why. I said, but listen, you're wrong. It's your movie, and I'm going to prove it to you. Just as a friend, sit there and listen. I'm going to read you the part. You're Esther, and sister is Tootie. And I started to read, and I was such a lying son of a bitch, so deceitful. Every time I got to Tootie's lines, she practically couldn't hear them. I would mutter them or throw them away, and then I would get to Esther, her part, and I read it. Oh, God, it was like Marlon Brando reading. So beautiful. You could hear every word, every nuance. It was funny. And I went through this whole thing. And slowly, I began to suspect that I might be getting there. And finally, I guess it was 130 pages or something. I said, and then you have the last line. Right here where we live in St. Louis. I closed the script. Judy, I can see them applauding, and they're applauding you. Full of crap. Anyway, she said, she gulped, I guess I better do it. I guess I have no choice. They'll suspend me. I said, go in and tell them. She did. We made the movie. She was the biggest hit she'd ever been. The movie was the biggest grosser in the history of MGM up to that point in its history. It was 20 years old, and that was the biggest grosser, as I said. At the preview sneaks in Long Beach, the producers came up to me and said, you know, we never really liked the script. We only did it because there's nothing to shoot in Technicolor. We didn't like it because there was no storyline, no plot. I said, sorry about that. There was no plot. There was no storyline. There was something else they'd never seen before. Touching moments and funny moments of characters who loved each other. It wasn't slushy or schmaltzy. It just seemed to keep them interested. And so I love that movie. It's been a great thing for me getting that kind of comment and approval over all the years. So that was it. My favorite movie. But I had others I loved. Others I thought were very funny. I think BYE BIRDie might be the funniest movie I ever wrote, or it might be Go West with the Marx Brothers. I know both of them in a theater are non-stop laughs, and that's the best way to tell what's funny.